She had learned the rhythm of pain long before she ever touched a battlefield. It was a language spoken in the trembling of a lip, the too rapid flutter of a pulse beneath her fingertips, the way a person's eyes would go wide and empty just before they slipped away. For Riley Kane, this understanding wasn't born in a sterile classroom or a textbook. It was forged in the sweltering heat of a village clinic in South Sudan, where her mother, a doctor with Médecins Sans Frontières, had let a 12-year-old Riley hold pressure on a wound while she fought to save a child from malaria. It was refined in the back of a rattling jeep in the mountains of Afghanistan, her father, a geologist, relying on her cool head and basic first aid kit when a landmine tore through their convoy, or leaving her to pack the wounds of their driver while the world dissolved into chaos and dust. By the time she was 25, Riley possessed a clinical knowledge that was not academic, but cellular. It was etched into her bones by proximity to death and a fierce, innate desire to push it back. Yet, on a rain-slicked tarmac at a joint military training facility in Virginia, none of that history was visible. The world saw only a slight woman, her dark hair plastered to her head by the drizzle, hefting a duffel bag that looked too heavy for her frame. She was a civilian, a contractor brought in by a new Pentagon initiative to integrate experienced trauma specialists into elite unit training exercises. The theory was sound. Modern warfare required medics who could think beyond the battlefield, who understood the chaos of civilian casualties and complex humanitarian environments. The reality, standing in the mud alongside a dozen of the Navy's most formidable SEALs, was a study in stark contrast. The SEALs were mountains of controlled violence. They moved with a predatory economy, their eyes scanning and assessing, their silence more intimidating than any shouted order. Their leader, a senior chief named Marcus Thorne, was a monument of a man with a face carved from granite and eyes the color of a winter sea. He had the look of someone who had seen the worst the world had to offer and had spat in its face. He barely glanced at Riley as she approached the group, his focus on the pouring rain and the mission parameters on his tablet. One of the younger SEALs, a cocky operator named Jonesy, nudged his companion. "Hey, or think she's here to do our stretching?" he muttered, just loud enough for the wind to carry. Riley heard him. She said nothing. She had learned long ago that words were useless currency in a place like this. Her credentials were not printed on a lanyard around her neck. They were the steady beat of her heart and the knowledge in her hands. Their objective for the day was a simulated direct action mission: clear a hostile village and extract a high-value target. But the true test, the one Riley was there for, would come after the shooting stopped. The scenario was designed to push their combat casualty care to the absolute limit. They would be inserted by helicopter into a mock village, face simulated enemy fire, and then deal with a mass casualty event involving both their own team and non-combatants. The SEALs had their own medics. Of course. They were the best in the world. The presence of a civilian woman, a consultant, was at best an oddity and at worst an insult. As they loaded into the helicopter, the rhythmic thump of the rotors a physical presence in her chest, Riley sat quietly, her duffel clutched between her knees. The SEALs ran through final equipment checks, the metallic clicks and snaps of familiar grim music. Senior Chief Thorne sat across from her, his gaze finally landing on her. It wasn't hostile, just intensely analytical, like a scientist observing a specimen. "You know the drill?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that cut through the engine noise. "When the shooting starts, you find cover and stay there. We'll call you in when the site is secure." It wasn't a request. It was an order. Riley met his gaze. "Understood," she said, and her voice calm and clear. She didn't add that in her experience, the shooting was the easy part. The real fight began in the silence that followed. The helicopter flared and touched down in a cloud of mud and displaced air. The ramp dropped, and the seals poured out like a dark tide, their forms swallowed by the gray-green brush and the simulated chaos of the village. Riley followed at a sprint, her heart hammering not from fear, but from the focused adrenaline of purpose. She found cover behind a low stone wall, the sounds of the exercise erupting around her, the sharp crack of blank rounds, the shouted commands, the thud of simulated grenades. She pressed her back against the cold, wet stone and waited, her senses tuned not to the gunfight, but to the silence she knew would follow. It came sooner than expected. A frantic shout. "Man down! Man down!" The rhythm of the exercise shifted. The shooting became sporadic, then stopped. Riley was on her feet before the last echo faded, moving towards the source of the cry, her duffel bag bouncing against her hip. She rounded a corner to find the scene of controlled pandemonium. The casualty collection point was a muddy clearing between two bombed-out buildings. 4 men were down. Jonesy, the one who had mocked her, was on his back, his face ashen, a crimson stain spreading rapidly across his thigh. Another operator, a quiet giant named Kowalski, lay crumpled against a wall, his arm bent at a sickening angle, his breathing shallow and rapid. A third, a young lieutenant, was clutching his side, blood seeping between his fingers. And the fourth was a civilian role player, a woman in local clothing, lying ominously still. And the SEAL medic, a burly man with hands the size of hams and a reputation for unshakable calm, was kneeling beside Jonesy. He moved with practiced efficiency, his shears already cutting away the simulated uniform to expose a graphic, realistically molded wound on his thigh, a spurting femoral artery, the lifeblood of the exercise. "Thorne! I need a tourniquet now! He's bleeding out!" The medic, whose name was Doc, bellowed, but Thorne was at Kowalski's side, trying to assess the damage to his arm and his breathing. The young lieutenant was trying to treat himself, his face a mask of pain and focus. The civilian lay ignored. The scene was a perfect, tragic representation of triage in a combat zone. The most immediate, fixable threat, Jonesy's arterial bleed, was being handled. But the sheer volume of casualties was overwhelming the single medic. Doc was brilliant, but he was one man. Riley saw the whole picture in a single, sweeping glance. It was a tableau of trauma, and her mind, honed by a lifetime of chaos, instantly sorted the victims by the cold calculus of survivability. Jonesy, with Doc on him, had the best possible care. He would live. The lieutenant's abdominal wound was serious, but he was conscious and breathing. He was stable for another minute. Kowalski was in trouble. The angle of his arm suggested a severe fracture, possibly a dislocated shoulder, but his breathing, shallow, rapid, pointed to something worse. A tension pneumothorax. A collapsed lung, the pressure building in his chest about to crush his heart. He would be dead in minutes without immediate intervention. And the civilian. But the woman, unmoving, silent, the one no one was looking at. Riley was already moving, her feet taking her past Doc and Jonesy, past the lieutenant, past Thorne, who looked up, his eyes narrowing as she passed. "Hey, I told you to stay back," he barked. She didn't even slow down. She slid to her knees in the mud beside the civilian. A quick visual assessment. No obvious bleeding. She pressed 2 fingers to the woman's neck, searching for a carotid pulse. It was there, but thready, weak, and far too fast. She leaned in, placing her ear near the woman's mouth and nose, her eyes fixed on her chest. No breath sound, no rise and fall. The woman wasn't breathing. Her airway was clear, no foreign objects. This was a respiratory arrest, likely from a blow to the head or the shock of the blast simulation. She was dying from a lack of oxygen. Riley didn't hesitate. She tilted the woman's head back, pinched her nose, sealed her mouth over the role players, and delivered 2 rescue breaths. The chest rose. Good. She checked the pulse again. Still there, but fading. The brain was starving. She began CPR, the rhythm of compressions automatic, her body a metronome of life. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. The mud soaked into her knees, the rain mixing with the sweat on her face. But she was in a bubble of absolute focus. From behind her, a roar. "What the hell are you doing?" It was Doc. He had Jonesy's bleed controlled, a tourniquet tight on his thigh, and had finally looked up to see the civilian woman on the ground, with Riley kneeling over her. "She's a goddamn civilian! We have 3 of my guys down! You get away from her and get me more bandages." Riley didn't stop. She didn't even turn her head. Between compressions, she spoke, her voice not loud but cut with a precision that sliced through the chaos. "Jonesy's bleed is controlled. The lieutenant is stable for now." Compression. Breath. "Kowalski has a tension pneumo. He'll be dead in 2 minutes." Compression. Breath. "This woman is in respiratory arrest. No pulse ox, no breath sounds. She's coding." The words hung in the air, a cold, clinical diagnosis that starkly contrasted with the emotional frenzy of the moment. Doc stared at her, his face contorted with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Thorne froze, his attention torn from Kowalski. He looked at Riley, then at Kowalski, whose gray face and desperate, shallow breaths suddenly painted a terrifyingly clear picture. The diagnosis Riley had just made, from across the chaos without even touching him, was chillingly accurate. "Doc!" Thorne's voice was a whip crack. "Check Kowalski! Now!" Doc hesitated for a fatal second, his training and his pride warring. Then he moved, scrambling over to the fallen giant. He ripped open Kowalski's vest and shirt, placed his ear on his chest, and immediately felt the telltale sign: absent breath sounds on one side, the trachea deviating. His eyes went wide. "Son of a bitch," he breathed. "He's got a tension pneumo. He's crashing." Riley's voice came again, calm and instructive, as if she were teaching a class. "He needs a needle decompression. 2nd intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. You have a 14-gauge cath in your kit." She didn't look up. Her hands kept their rhythm on the woman's chest. 30 compressions. 2 breaths. Doc fumbled for his kit, his massive hands suddenly clumsy. He found the large-bore needle, his mind racing to remember the procedure he'd done 100 times in training, but never on a real crashing patient. He looked at Kowalski's heaving chest, then at the needle, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This was the moment. The difference between textbook and reality. Riley saw the hesitation. She didn't judge it. She understood it. In the middle of a compression, she spoke again, her tone gentle, guiding. "Feel for the space just below the collarbone. Straight in until you feel a pop. You'll hear the air release. You can do this." Her words were a lifeline. Doc's training clicked back into place. He found the landmark, his fingers trembling only slightly, and pushed the needle in. There was a faint hissing escape of air, an almost inaudible sound that was the most beautiful music a medic could hear. Kowalski's body jerked, and then, miraculously, his breathing deepened, his color instantly beginning to improve. He wasn't out of the woods, but the immediate threat was gone. Doc sat back on his heels, staring at the needle protruding from his teammate's chest, a profound and humbling realization washing over him. He had just been talked through a life-saving procedure by a woman he had dismissed moments before. The silence that fell over the clearing was heavier than the gunfire that had preceded it. The only sounds were the soft hiss of rain and the rhythmic, unwavering thump of Riley's compressions on the civilian's chest. Everyone was watching her now. The young lieutenant had forgotten his own pain. Jonesy, and pale and shocked on the ground, stared with wide eyes. And Senior Chief Thorne, the unshakable granite of the team, watched with an expression that was completely